Welcome back to All Things Lord of the Rings with your host Alex, also known as Solanus Dracone. So, last episode, we talked about how times were good for the elves after the rising of the sun and the moon, and how Finrod and Turgon had been visited by Ulmo in their dreams, and decided to set up a couple of strongholds. Finrod set up Nargothrond to be a mirror of Thingol's fortress city of Menegroth. But Turgon had a bit of trouble finding a good spot to set up what he wanted to do, which was to make a city on a hill in the image of Tirion upon Tuna back in Aman. Turgon finally found his perfect spot to set up shop in the hidden Vale of Tumladen. This spot was located in the middle of a massive ring of mountains, so tall and sheer that it was nearly impossible to get to any way besides knowing the secret path up the river Sirion or by the air. Pretty much the only previous inhabitants of this area were the Eagles of Thorondor. Turgon found the place, but didn't immediately begin to set things up, because he wanted this place to be as secret as possible, and that takes a lot of secret planning. After Dagor Aglareb, however, the fire that Ulmo lit under Turgon's backside got a bit hotter, and he decided to put his plans into action. He took a bunch of the most skilled and tough members of his folk to Tumladen to begin setting up his new city. It took about 52 years, while Turgon still lived for the most part in Nevrast, but finally it was done. Turgon named his new city Gondolin, which was Quenya for Rock of the Music of the Water, because of the fact that there were some fountains upon the hill. But as all things tended to, the city's name was different in Sindarin, and since the Sindarin speakers outnumbered the Quenya speakers, the city came to be known as Gondolin, the Secret Rock. Does this name sound familiar? Gondolin. Yes, Gondolin is the place where some of the famous swords and blades from The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings books were fashioned. Glamdring the Foehammer, which Gandalf used, Orcrist the Goblin Cleaver, the Sword of Thorin, and even Sting, Bilbo and Frodo's trusty knife, were all fashioned in Turgon's hidden city of Gondolin. This being a Noldor city, they made tons and tons of other awesome weapons and armor, because remember, the Noldor were the smithingest of all the elves. Just as Turgon was setting out to move into the new city, Ulmo showed up and basically said, "Good work, go live in Gondolin. I'll do what I can to keep your journey there safe and hidden, since I've got control of the waters and all that stuff. Gondolin's gonna be the longest-lived city in the fight against Morgoth, I'll tell you that much. Just remember two things. First, that you really need to get the idea out of your head that you guys can win this alone. You can't, you need help from the west. Second, you're still under the doom of Mandos. You might have to face treason within your walls, which will kind of screw you over. Someone's gonna show up from Nevrast to warn you before this happens, though, so what you need to do is leave some armor and weapons in your house, and I'll see to it that the person who you should trust to warn you finds them. I'll give you the specs. Make sure you do it." So, with this sage advice in mind, Turgon began emptying out Nevrast, bringing with him all of his Noldor people, which composed a large amount of the people of Fingolfin, and more than a few Sindarin elves, bit by bit to Gondolin, before finally moving himself there, and nobody outside of Gondolin was told about this. As far as anyone was concerned, Turgon and these people vanished from the face of Arda, and nobody ever found Gondolin on their own either, at least nobody who was an elf, nor did Turgon send anybody outside of Tumladen. He wanted this place to be super, super secret. And there he and his people did prosper. This place had become truly a place of wonder and beauty, and the birthplace of many great works of smithing. Some of the cool things Turgon set up were a set of trees which, you guessed it, were basically memorials to Laurelin and Telperion. They didn't produce light of any kind, and were frankly artificial, being made of at least partly of gold and silver. The golden tree was called Glingol, and the silver tree was called Belthil. But the most beautiful thing Turgon made was his daughter, Idril, also known as Celebrimbor the Silverfoot. Now, while all this city building was going on, there was someone else who had went with Finrod when he moved for that period to Menegroth. He brought his sister with him. His sister was, wait for it, Galadriel. And while Finrod was busy building Nargothrond and doing his thing, Galadriel stayed in Menegroth, and she and Melian did quite a bit of talking. At first, they just talked about the glory days of the Noldor and Valinor, but Galadriel really didn't want to talk about anything that happened after the slaying of the trees. Melian, being a Maya and just very insightful in general, was all, "So, I notice you don't tell me what happened after all the good stuff. Why don't you talk about that?" And Galadriel was all, "Those dark days are in the past, and I'd really kind of like to just remember the good stuff and not have to think about those memories. Even if I know things can turn bad again, it makes me feel better to think of the hope that yet lives." Melian looked her right in the eyes and was all, "Okay, I'm gonna level with you. I don't believe for 1 second that the Noldor came as messengers from the Valar, even if they showed up really in our hour of need and saved our asses, because none of you ever seem to speak about the Valar, and certainly haven't brought any messages from them to Thingol, which, seems like something you guys really should have done if you were sent here. Especially not even any letters from Thingol's brother Olwe. So you guys were thrown out, weren't you?" Galadriel replied, "Well, sorta. We didn't come as messengers of the Valar, and I wouldn't say we were thrown out because we left of our own free will. We came here to get some revenge on Morgoth." And so she told about Finwë's murder and the Silmarils, but held back about the Oath of Fëanor, the kinslaying, the Doom of Mandos, and basically anything that incriminated the Noldor, even though she wasn't involved in the kinslaying or the Oath. Now, this is speculation, but she probably left that stuff out because A, she didn't want to snitch on her own people, and B, well, guilt by association was a pretty big thing. Melian was all, "I know there's stuff you're leaving out, but I'm not going to press it. I do have to talk to Thingol about this, however, because it's stuff he kinda needs to know." And talk to Thingol she did, saying, "This is pretty important. With my Maya foresight, I see this being a big issue in the future. I think we're kind of tied into Valinor's drama now. Morgoth already killed Fëanor, and these Silmarils seem like something that's going to lead to a lot of trouble and cost a lot of lives before they recovered. But what you really ought to know is that your friend Finwë was killed." This rightly bummed Thingol out, and after sitting in some grieved silence for a bit, he said, "Man, this explains a lot I was curious about. The Noldor didn't come as our saviors, at least that's not what they intended to do. But they're at least allies against Morgoth, and I don't see him making peace anytime soon." Melian replied, "Yeah, they came because of that stuff, but there's more to it than that. I don't 100% know what's up, but be careful of the Sons of Fëanor. I feel like they committed some crimes, because I feel some wrath of the Valar upon them. There's something they're hiding, something they're ashamed of." And Thingol replied, "Well, from everything I've heard of them, they're probably our greatest ally against Morgoth." And Melian replied, and this is verbatim, not paraphrasing, "Their swords and their counsels shall have 2 edges." And that was the last they spoke of it. Well, that certainly ate up some time. I'll be honest, I didn't realize I'd be able to get so much out of so small a subject, but there you have it. The events of the First Age are so packed with interesting stuff that this series might last longer and get much more in-depth than I originally had hoped. I hope you've been enjoying the story. I've been enjoying telling it. Thank you all for watching. Once again, I am Alex, also known as Solanus Dracone, and this has been All Things Lord of the Rings. Goodbye.